too. I want to thank everyone for their work that we do daily around here, so thank you all. First, I'd like to, as well, thank you all as the media and our community, our residents, for reserving judgment, for standing behind us during this investigation, and allowing us to gather all the facts before coming to a conclusion. That means a lot to the men and women that put their lives on the line for us every day. We appreciate the hard work that they do for this community, for the residents, for all of us. And it's important that they know they're appreciated, because the work is hard. So we want to thank them, as well as thanking you again for reserving judgment on this. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Kelly to provide you with information. Thank you.
10 New York City Police Department was made aware of a YouTube video in which York City officers were shown arresting an individual. The video was labeled police brutality. This department immediately began an internal investigation into the video and the actions of our officers during the arrest. The arrest of Mr. Montanez was the result of officers being dispatched to the 700 block of East Market Street for a reported man with a gun. When officers responded, they encountered Montanez, who ran upon seeing the officers and needed to be physically subdued. During the arrest of Montanez, he dropped a stolen handgun which he was in possession of. A taser was utilized in order to gain compliance from Mr. Montanez, and he was handcuffed. As Montanez is brought to his feet, he leaned into an officer standing nearby and began to wipe blood across the right side of the officer's body. The officer reacts to this, jumps backwards as he knocks Montanez's head away from him with a glancing blow from his forearm. Montanez is then taken to a waiting police cruiser without further incident. The officers involved in this incident freely came forward and gave their account of what occurred. The use of force against Montanez was never denied, and our investigation then focused on whether the officer was justified in his actions. The transfer of blood from persons in custody to our officers is a very real threat and can be considered an assault against the safety of our officers, as they do not have the luxury of the medical profession in wearing the personal protective equipment that is suggested by the Centers for Disease Control when dealing with bleeding persons. This is exampled in the 1994 study of blood exposure to police officers in Denver, Colorado. The quotations say, exposures occurred in circumstances in which there was little or no time for the officer to put on protective gloves or clothing because the officer was restraining or being assaulted by a suspect, or two, gloves would have not been protective because of the penetration by needles. The authors conclude that Denver police officers rarely, sorry, there's an air blowing in here that just dried out my contact lens, have mucosal exposures to blood, but when they do, the risk of exposure to HIV-infected blood is quite high. The officer in this case utilized minimal amount of force, a glancing blow with his forearm as he jumped away from Mr. Montanez in order to limit his blood exposure. Once extricated from the threat, he took no further action. It is our opinion that the officer had the legal and justifiable right to protect himself from possible disease transfer and used minimal force in doing so. An interview with Mr. Montanez revealed that he did not remember being punched, struck, or kicked, only that he was tased. We'll take any questions from anyone.
Chief, when did the officer who seems fitted to have protected himself, when did he come forward and indicate his version of what happened?
As soon as he saw the video, the YouTube video online, he heard about it, went and viewed it, called us directly and said, I'm the officer in the video. I believe I was justified in my actions, and these are the reasons. And we then had our internal affairs inspector sit down and interview him and the other officers involved as per our protocol.
Should the officer have come forward in August when the incident first occurred?
No, because the officers, in their use of force at that point in time, filled out a use of force form, which our officers do on a daily basis, and it was such a minimal action that it wasn't anything that would, raise our interest in any way.
You said he says he doesn't, Montanez has no recollection of being struck. Do you
Yes.
think any of this would have happened if it wasn't for that video? Would this have been an issue?
What we found in the investigation was that Our internal affairs inspector went out to the neighborhood where this took place, knocked on doors. We've since had one person come forward who was actually the person that took the video. When asked why they didn't come forward at that time, they said they didn't want to get involved. And Inspector Roberts, please correct me if I quote this wrong. But they had no interest in getting involved in that point. The person that took the video was a friend of Mr. Montanez's girlfriend. So they just had no interest at that point. They still, to this day, while she was interviewed by our internal affairs inspector, has no interest in publicly coming forward.
One of the things that you said initially, I guess several weeks ago, was that it was your hope that you might be able to technically enhance the video as a result of, I assume since you talked to the person who shot it, and I assume you got access to the original, were you able to get a close-up view of this video?
We still have no access to an original video. We took the video that you all had, that you saw on YouTube, and it was sent to McLaughlin, which is the Mid-Atlantic Great Lakes Organized Crime Law Enforcement Network. It's a regional service that we utilize. We've used it in the past to enhance videos for homicide investigations that we were doing. We provided the video that we had to them. Because it was not an original video, there was not a whole lot they could do to it. They lightened it up, but it really didn't clear up the video any more than what you saw on YouTube.
But you do not have the original in your custody?
No, we do not.
Did these folks not provide it to you?
They haven't come forward with the video. I don't even know that the original exists anymore, do you?
Yes, it does exist. They did not want to release it for this time.
So it does still exist, but they're refusing to release it to us at this time.
Chief, as you well know, as that thing was presented on YouTube, the words police brutality were clearly blazoned across the top of that web video. And now in the aftermath of this investigation, what are your thoughts now about the way that video was portrayed to a almost worldwide audience?
Well, I think A, people, when they look at videos, oftentimes will see what they want to see. B, there may be a self-serving interest in how someone labels a video that's put out there or the information that's given. And as I said, when this video initially came out, we're not going to discuss the video until we are able to sit down and look at the totality of the circumstances behind the video and determine what took place. We're not denying that our officer used force. It was minimal force. What we're saying is the force that was utilized by the officer was justified as to what was occurring at the time that the video was taken.
So your response now to the terminology police brutality and the allegations that were made by the attorney representing Mr. Montanez, what do you want to say now?
Just what I just said. This is not police brutality. We believe that the officer used force, but the force that was utilized was justifiable under the circumstances and the totality of the event that was taking place. You cannot see on that video whether Mr. Montanez is bleeding or not. So it's hard to watch the video and see exactly what took place. I'm sure that all of you standing before me today would not want blood wiped up across them, would not want that exposure. There's many diseases that can be transferred from a person to our officers by this blood. And then once that is done, we not only have to deal with the officer being exposed to the blood, but there's precautions that have to be taken place to make sure that their family, when they go home, that they don't expose them to any diseases. So it starts a huge chain reaction of events just from this person wiping blood up across them. This officer had every justifiable reason to protect himself from that blood exposure, and that's what we're saying.
And was this blood, I mean, how was he wiping it? Can you explain that at all?
He was bent over. If you look at the video, he's handcuffed, he was picked up, and he's bent over. And as he starts to stand up, he wipes from the officer's right arm up across his body to the left side. The officer then jumps back and swings his arm up. It's not a closed-handed punch. It's not any type of punch or closed-handed strike. It's an open hand. He brings his arm up and clears Mr. Montanez's head out of the way to prevent him from continuing to wipe blood up his body.
And the attorney